Shower wall boards are the perfect tile alternative, and they give you an amazing effect in your bathroom if they're installed well. And in this video I'm going to show you the complete process to installing shower boards so that by the end of it you'll be able to get a pro finish. So the boards we're using today are called Fibro boards, and the first thing we need to do is take a look at the types of substrate that we can fit them onto. You can put them over tiles, you can put them over stud work like this, but one of the best things about Fibro boards is they can be used over less favourable walls, such as walls that have been patched up where old tiles have been taken off and things like this. As long as there's no loose bits on the wall, you can go straight over the top. So if you've taken tiles off and you've got any loose adhesive or plaster, just go around and make sure you haven't got any blown parts, so parts where there's sort of hollow air bubbles behind. Anything that's loose, take all that off first, and then you'll be good to go straight over the top of old adhesives and things like that. So they're very versatile and they're nice and easy to use. Now this is not sponsored, these are just boards that I like. I've used these for a few years, they're brilliant boards and I really want to show you guys them. So what we're going to do now is move on to measuring, because we need to measure a few times, because if you cut one of these boards wrong, they're pretty expensive, it's going to cost you a bit of money. So we always measure twice, cut once. So let's get a tape measure and measure out for this first board. In this particular shower we're going to do this back wall first. Now we're going down to a shower tray, so we're going to do this back wall first. That's a lot easier than trying to do the side walls first. We can put that backboard on, we'll be able to get that backboard installed and then bring these side walls into it. Now I don't use internal corner trims. You can buy Fibro internal corner trims, but if you're going down to a shower, what I find, the internal corner trims, they're always prone to leaking when you've got that much water down in a corner like this. So I do mine like tiles, I seal them, I make sure I've got a good silicone bead. I've never had a single problem doing it that way. I'll show you how I do the internal corners when we move on to this adjoining board over here. For now, all we want to do is get this first board measured. Now grab a pencil and a tape. These boards are 600mm in width, so I'm going to mark 600mm on the wall, and then what I want to do is make a couple of measurements, 2 or 3 measurements, depending if your ceiling has any lumps or bumps in it or if it's nice and square. So we know the shower tray is nice and level. I didn't install it, is it level?
It is perfectly level.
So that shower tray is nice and level. We're not going to have any lumps and bumps, so we should have 2 even measurements if the ceiling isn't running out. I'm going to make a measurement here and a measurement here, and I'll be able to tell if there's any deviation between those 2 measurements. I'll hold the bottom of the tape with my foot and I'll make a measurement to the top there. So that is 2, 2, 2, 4. Then exactly the same thing again, another measurement over this side from the shower tray to the ceiling, and it is out very slightly, 2, 2, 2, 3. So we're only talking 1 mil, not too bad at all. I'm going to mark that on the wall. So we've got 2 measurements. We know we're only 1 mil out. The silicone will take that up. If you've got big gaps, of course silicone in a shower area is not going to take it up, but a couple of mil or 2, that's fine. Now make sure you measure a few times, get the measurements absolutely perfect, because once you cut these, there's no going back. These are about 125 quid a board, and it's going to cost you a lot of money if you cut one wrong. Now when you're cutting these boards, you want a nice flat surface to work on. So you can see I've got this bit of insulation. You don't have to use insulation, but it does help because your saw blade can pass through and go into that insulation. A track saw to cut these, but you don't need a track saw. You can just use a circular saw. The only thing is, if you're using a circular saw, use one with a good sharp blade, but most importantly, turn the board upside down so the decorative face is facing down. As your saw blade, I'll take the battery out, as your saw blade comes up, you want the blade to cut up into the decorative face. If you've got it this way up and you cut it with the face towards the base of the saw, if you like, as the blade comes through, it'll chip the board. We're using a track saw, so we haven't got to worry about that. We have a splinter guard on the edge of the track, so we're going to be using one of these. We're going to cut the height of this board now, and then we'll show you how to rip some boards and do different, more intricate cuts later. This one's nice and simple. We're just going to take the top off the board, and then we can get this first one installed. There's lots to read in your instructions that you get with a Fibro board. I can't even fit it on the camera. So what I normally do with these is that, because there's not really a lot you need to know once you've followed this video. Now, in all seriousness, if you don't know how to do this, you've never done it before, it might be worth just giving these a quick browse over to see if there's something that you pick up from the instructions before you make a start. So our measurement was 2223. So we'll transfer 2223 onto the board. I'll do that at both ends. So we've got 2 marks there. And now we're just going to line the track saw up on those marks. Now with a track saw, you run the splinter guard on the 2 marks. We don't have to draw a line across it. Of course, if you're using a circular saw, you'd flip this over, you'd transfer the mark, and then you would use a straight edge to draw a line, and you'd use your circular saw to cut along that line. With a track saw, we line the splinter guard up with the 2 marks we made. That gives us our straight edge, and we can just whip the bottom off this sheet. I'm going to set my depth stop on the saw to 12 millimeters so that we know we're only just going to pass through the board. So now we've got that first one cut and I've got an off cut, I'll show you a little bit about why I like fibro boards. Again, not a sponsor, just like the product. These are a marine ply board, multiple layers of ply, and you will see it's the highest quality ply as well, and they have a decorative face on there that's super hard, so no water ingress. To be honest, I'm not trying to sell the product here, so I don't know all the different specs. It is just a much better board than the cheap plastic ones. It's a solid board, you don't get any water ingress. It's a tongue and groove click system. We'll show you how we do that and seal it properly in a minute, because if we don't seal it perfectly, you will get water ingress, so it's very important that we use the right technique when we fit these. Now normally when you lift these, you would use suction pads, but that's not going to work because this is a textured surface. So I've brought the board back in the room. So now we've got the board in the room, let's have a look at the click system. This is the leading tongue, and this goes into the receiving tongue here. So you can see we've got a bigger tongue and a smaller tongue. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to apply silicone on this tongue here when we install the board. I'll show you that in a moment, but you can see the click system and how it works. You put the board in at an angle and it simply clicks in. So I've spun the board round and I'm going to get some adhesive on the back. Now you want to use an adhesive for this, not a silicone. You'll want 2 things. You'll want silicone, clear silicone, and adhesive. Now although X-Pro Stick Seal does both, you're better off to use a clear silicone on your joints and an adhesive on the back of the board to stick it to the wall. I use X-Pro Stick Seal these days. The guys sent it to me to test at the start of the year. I've been using it all year. It's super strong stuff. It's mold resistant and you can even use it in wet areas. Now what we're going to do, I'm going to cut the nozzle nice and big. So you want quite a big cut on there. Now we're doing big lines with this stuff. You're going to create a pattern a little bit like what you see there. You are going to go through quite a bit of this stuff because we need a good strong adhesion to the wall. We don't want these coming off later. This is the hardest bit, is moving these boards around in this small room. Try and do it without getting it all over your fingers. I'll grab the board and I'll tip the bottom of the board in first. Get it nice and plumb into the corner there because we're working from the corner. I'll get it in the corner there, and then I'm just going to push it back to the wall. And that adhesive will initially grab onto the wall. Now we just want to go around and make sure it's got good contact on the wall. So that's the first one up. Stick seal adhesive will hold that in place until it goes off, and once it goes off, it'll be rock solid. I'll pop a link to the stick seal and all the other handy things we use on this job in the description below so that you can go and check them out. So I'll measure the width between our first board and the wall here. We want to bring this next one right into the corner. Now because that wall over there is slightly out, this will probably be a very slightly different measurement. Again, make sure you get your measurements correct. We'll have 3 measurements, 1 in the middle, 1 at the top, 1 at the bottom, and then we'll be able to cut that piece to fit exactly using those 3 measurements. And so you don't forget those measurements on the way to the saw outside, I like to make a little plan, and that way if you write down your 3 width measurements and your height there, you can't get it wrong. So now remember the tongues. We want to keep that small tongue. That locks into that first board we put up. That makes this the bottom and that the top. We've cut the length off it. Now we just need to rip it down to the correct width. Measuring from the face of the board, not the tongue. Remember, you don't want to be measuring off the tongue because that'll be wrong. We're going to measure from the face, and we're going to take that bottom measurement there, 580, and transfer it onto the board. And because that measurement is different all the way up, we'll follow our measurements up the board. So 575 is our next measurement, and then our top one is 570. Now we know the measurements are correct, and in exactly the same way as we did earlier, we're going to cut the width of the board. Now before we can fix this next board to the wall, we need to put a silicone seal down the lead and tongue. This is a clear sanitary silicone, again by X-Pro. This is the Brilliant 365, really good silicone. What we're going to do is we're going to run that down that lead and tongue from the top to the bottom. Now normally this is where the suckers come in handy. You wouldn't have to put your hand in this stuff. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of choice. So we're going to get this board somewhat in position. And what's going to happen, we're going to tip this board in. It's a little bit more difficult in boards that go into the corner. We might need to give it a helping hand with a little bar or screwdriver just to push it over, because you don't have much of a gap and you need the boards to be in tight. Now what you'll find, if you tip the board, it will click in. The camera's in the way though, so give that a shove, Chris, for me from the other side, and you'll see, and that gap's closed up nicely. You've got excess silicone on the surface. That's a good sign. That means that joint is sealed. Check the joint all the way up and down, check there's no gaps, and then we'll get the excess silicone off the surface. Next thing you want, soapy water in a spray bottle and a silicone profiling tool. And I'm just going to spray the surface along the joint. The eagle-eyed of you will have noticed we've gone forward in time and filmed this on another board. That quite simply is because I forgot to hit record on the previous board. Now we'll use the edge of the profiling tool to remove the excess silicone, and the soapy water stops it from sticking on the surface but keeps it in the joint. So I'll run this nice and flat on the wall from top to bottom. And you can see you get plenty of excess off there. Now use a trade wipe, just give that a final wipe over. No excess on the surface and you get a perfect joint. We've got the first two in, we're now going to move on to the next wall. I don't use internal corners, I use a silicone joint, two silicone joints. I'll show you how I do them. I have an initial silicone joint and then a finishing silicone joint, and that'll give us the same finish essentially as tiles. There'll be no water ingress, it works perfectly. So we're probably going to have to do some scribing, which is great because you guys will get to learn how to scribe. So I've cut this one to height. I've not put any adhesive on it for now because I know that wall is not plumb. It's not perfectly upright. So we're going to need to scribe this board. So if I put the board in place, so look at the gap difference between the top as we go down to the bottom. You can see we've got a big gap. So we need to create that shape so we can bring this board over to meet this one. We need a good seal and we need to take the small tongue off the board as well. And by scribing it, we'll close that gap up. We'll have a nice silicone seal in there. You won't get any water in there. So we've got the board held up against the wall, and to do our scribe, I've cut a block a little bit bigger than the biggest gap at the bottom there. And I'm going to place my pencil against the block and we're going to run that up the wall. And you can see what that does is transfers a line all the way up the board. So you can see we've got that line transferred onto the board there. We've run the track saw along the shape of the line. You can see it's thin at the bottom, nice and big at the top there, and that'll give us the perfect shape. So we'll buzz that off with a saw and then we'll be able to fit this perfectly. Now track saws like this aren't cheap, and every week on Ultimate Tool competitions we give away thousands of pounds worth of the best tools from the best brands. And this week on Ultimate Tool Competitions, we got some special stuff for you. Because this week we're giving away the 7-piece DeWalt Power Tool Kit. This is a brushless kit and it's worth nearly 800 quid. And it's just £1 to get a ticket for it. This kit has got a bit of everything. A drill, an impact driver, a circular saw, a multi-tool, a grinder, a blower, a planer, and all the batteries and accessories. So head over to Ultimate Tool Competitions where you guys could grab a winning ticket. There's a link down below in the description. Low odds, low prices, and the best power tools out there on the market. I'll see you over there. So now I'll fix this one in place and I'll show you how we do that first stage of silicone. Now I've tipped it out very slightly, and this leading edge here, the one that fits into this wall, wants clear silicone down it. So a nice bead of clear silicone on the edge of the panel. And what's going to happen as we push that panel in, that silicone is going to create a seal. Now we will have another stage to this. Once all of this has gone off and we've finished the process, there will be a profiled seal down this as well, just to make sure we've got complete defense against any water getting in. So the silicone bead is on there. We'll place that roughly in, and then what we're going to do is push the whole thing over in one go. And you can see that silicone is going to squidge out of that joint. You need to make sure it's hard up into the corner there, and then you've got a good joint. Get that profiling tool in the corner, and you can see there, that's taken off the excess. And I'm going to drop it. And that is how we do our corners. We'll come back to do that finishing bit of silicone once we've finished the rest of these panels. Now this next panel goes around the edge of our shower tray, so we have to create a little shape. I've drawn myself a little pattern, and I've used a tape measure and a square to make a series of measurements so that I know the shape I need to cut. Make sure, double check that you've got the correct pattern. If you want to, you can cut and use a pattern. Use an off-cut board. Chris, where's that off-cut? Now, because we haven't got any spare sheets, we don't want to wait for delivery, we don't want to waste 125 quid, we made a little pattern just to make sure that this slides in over our shower tray and it's perfect. We've transferred that onto our sheet, and we know that if we cut this out, it'll fit perfectly.
Now I'm just using my laminate blade in a jigsaw to cut out that pattern.
Now we're going to cut our end trim. We've marked the height of the end trim. You can see it here, got a little mark on there. All I'm going to do is use a hacksaw and a miter block to cut the length of the trim. This is the other side of the shower screen, so this is not in a wet area. The shower screen's going to finish somewhere here. This trim is on the other side of it. Bear in mind there is some moisture, but there is no wet area here. So all we're going to do is we're going to stick this on with a little bit of clear silicone onto the edge of the board. That'll seal the board and hold the trim on.
And then you can just stick that trim onto your board.
Perfect, and that is how you fit an end trim. So we've got 2 walls complete minus our silicone seals around the edge, which we'll show you at the end. Now we're going to tackle this section over here. It's a little trickier. We've got 2 pipes for the shower to go around. We've got a corner and an external corner to go around, so plenty to show you over this side. But before I show you how we go around these pipes, if you aren't subscribed already, now's the time, because there's loads more to come on the channel. You don't want to miss it, and hit like, because that helps this video reach more people. Right, what we're going to do, get our board measured up for this section, and then we'll cut these holes. Shower pipes for a mixer valve, typically at 150mm centres, and you can buy jigs, but you don't really need to for this. These pipes they've got a little bit of flexibility in them, a few mil, 150mm centres, so 150mm from centre of that pipe to centre of that pipe, and they're nice and level, so we now know that we can cut our board around them. We're going to put a couple of hole saws through, but how do we know where to put them? Well, we know our board comes into this corner here, so we'll go from the corner for our first one, and we'll take that measurement and we'll put it across onto the board there. And then if we go back from that edge again, 415, so if we go 415 for our second pipe, make a little mark, and they should be 150 apart. Now the board goes down to that shower tray, so we know we can take a mark from that. From the bottom of the board, 1040.
Now I'm using a level just to bring those marks together.
And by taking their measurements, we now have 2 points where we can drill for them shower pipes. To make the holes, 30mm hole saw and a drill, and we can just drill the hole. The board's nicely scribed into the corner, stuck onto the timbers there. Our pipes run nicely through the middle. They've got a little bit of movement, but we're going to put an easy fix shower valve kit. Well, Chris is, I'm not doing this bathroom, but he's going to be putting that on there, and that will fix those pipes in place. External corners are nice and simple as well. We've brought our board here up flush with the corner, and we have this piece here that's going to go on the end. All we're going to do, stick that on, and we've got this external corner trim. These come from Fibo as well. All this does is slots in behind this board here, so we'll slot that in there, and then this board here goes into the rebate in the trim. Of course, you need to make sure you cut the correct width, because if you're too short, you'll see it within the trim. And also we're going to pop some silicone on the edges within the trims when we stick it on, and that helps to just seal and prevent any moisture from getting in and damaging that board. If you get moisture in on these boards anywhere, of course, it'll eventually blow the board. So we're going to seal the edges with silicone. This isn't in the shower, so it's not that critical, but still, with the moisture and stuff, I quite like to seal the edges where I can. Now we can just pop the trim onto that board, and now you can just push the whole thing in one go. So our boards are up, that just leaves us silicone sealant, which is a very vital step when you're installing shower boards. We need to make sure no moisture can get in behind the boards. If it could, on the joints or anywhere where there's corners, of course, you could blow the board, it could damage the board. So it's vital that we get this right. I do have a siliconing guide on the channel, I'll put that in the description, and that was actually filmed using fibre boards of a different colour, and it will show you how you can use the proper tools and the proper techniques to silicone effectively. In this shower, we've got clear down the corners and white around the bottom of the tray. It's your choice. You can use a coloured silicone if you want to. If you've got grey panels, you could use a grey silicone. It really is your choice. Just make sure you use a sanitary silicone. I've done the corners. I'm just going to profile up around the tray. When I say profile, I like to use silicone profiling tools, whether it be the silicone block, Kramer tools, traditional style tools, wooden sticks, whatever you prefer. You just need to tool up around the bottom to get the perfect finish, because if you just use your finger, it concaves and it attracts mold and leaks. We want to make sure we're using these things to get a good finish and prevent any issues in the future with the board. And you can see if you do it that way, you get the perfect finished result. Look how nice and smooth that silicone is. And that is it. The sealant's got to be plastered, and when that's plastered, I'd advise running a silicone sealant around the top as well. Obviously with a nice white bead of silicone around the top stops any moisture getting in there. This one's got to be plastered, so that hasn't been done yet. You can see when you use high quality shower boards and install them well, you get the perfect tile alternative. And hopefully this video has helped you. If it has, hit one of these because they're bound to help you as well, and I'll see you guys in the next one.